everyone. We have kind of a momentous class today because this is going to be the last lecture before the last exam in this class. So next class, we'll have exam 3, and then after we finish up exam 3, I'm going to start teaching about healthcare systems around the world and how you construct healthcare policies. So it's going to be kind of an interesting transition that we'll do starting the class after the exam. But for today, we're going to kind of wrap up this section of the course, and we're going to be going through Chapter 14. The title of the chapter is Health Technology Assessment. I have a couple of kind of announcements, FYIs, before I jump into this chapter. One, I'm just going to acknowledge this chapter. It deals with kind of a sensitive issue because a challenge for a health economist is how do you think about when investing in medical goods is worth it. And this is a very sensitive question because a lot of times we have treatments that are very expensive, but they save lives. And so this is difficult because governments and people have limited amounts of money. And so there's usually some kind of decision rule that's used in terms of when an investment in a person's health is deemed to be worth it. I'm kind of doing air quotes that you can't see. And so that's kind of a layer of this. And then the other kind of layer that is going to be affecting this chapter is health economists. We want to think about kind of how much bang for the buck you get with medical technologies. And there's kind of two ways medical technology or a medicine can influence a person's health. One, it can make them live longer. But two, it can also increase the quality of their life. And those are two very distinct things. So you can think about a person who's in a car wreck and they're in the hospital on life support. It would be very different to say that medical technology is being used to extend their life if they're just going to be on life support versus saying medical technology is going to be used to increase the quality of their life. In other words, they're awake, they're conscious, and that's another avenue that you can affect a person's health. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because oftentimes there's a tension for physicians in terms of, you got a sick patient here, are we going to kind of approach this by just making the longevity of their life the target, or are we going to make the quality of their life the target? Because sometimes particular treatment regimes can increase your life expectancy by a lot, but you're kind of miserable the whole time because of the treatment, whereas an alternative might give you a really kind of high quality of life where you feel good, but you're not expected to live as long. And so, again, this is just kind of a sensitive issue that economists have to deal with because we have to think about kind of, using this term loosely, like the bang for the buck that you get from different types of medicine. Okay, this is a super long introduction, but I got one more piece of it. So that was the first thing. The second thing is we're going to be talking about something called cost effectiveness in today's class. The reason I'm going to make this second announcement is because if any of you are thinking of going into health economics as a career, what I found out once I left an econ department is that health economists who exist in like public health departments do entirely different work than economists who exist within, or health economists who exist within health, or within econ departments, I'm sorry. So basically, if you're in an econ department, they don't teach you at all about cost effectiveness analysis, except I'm kind of throwing a little bit of it into this class just so you can get some exposure to it. But I'm not at all an expert in this. The health economists who live in public health departments, they devote their whole research careers to doing cost effectiveness analysis, so this is like really their thing. So if you like cost effectiveness type stuff and you're thinking about graduate work, kind of lean towards public health. If you're interested more in like data analysis and kind of more economic models and applying those to healthcare settings, then you kind of lean towards the econ route and then call yourself a health economist who's in traditional econ instead of public health. Okay, so now for the chapter. So the first thing I'm going to start with is new medical technology is expensive. Anytime we invent a new machine or a new medicine, it takes money to kind of do the research to develop it. So what we're going to be thinking about is when do the benefits of new medical technology outweigh the costs? Okay, so again, the way we're going to kind of try to operationalize this is by using cost effectiveness. So this is going to be the process of measuring the monetary costs and the health benefits of medical treatments and procedures and therapies and any other type of like medical good or service that a person might utilize. Okay, there's going to be a very specific goal of cost effectiveness analysis. And the goal of cost effectiveness analysis is to compare multiple therapies or strategies that can be used to treat the same disease or condition in terms of, one, how expensive they are, and two, how effective they are. So, in case you missed it, the blank that you need to fill in is same. Okay, the reason I'm emphasizing this is because when we're doing cost effectiveness analysis, we're always doing head-to-head comparisons of two different therapies or medicines or something, but the two different things that we're comparing to each other have to have the same intended purpose. So it's never going to make sense for us to do a comparison of Band-Aids and chemotherapy because those two things are used for very different problems. So it doesn't make sense to kind of do a head-to-head comparison of them. What we might do a head-to-head comparison of is chemo versus radiation, because those are both two treatments that are used for cancer. So the idea is, let's take these two things that are kind of used to treat the same problem, cancer, and then let's do a head-to-head comparison in terms of which one costs more money, which one's more expensive, and then second of all, which one does a better job of treating the cancer, which one's more effective. Okay, I'm first going to start by defining what a dominated treatment is. A dominated treatment is a treatment that is both more expensive and less effective than some other treatment. So in other words, a dominated treatment exists when you're doing a head-to-head comparison of two things and you find that one of those things is just a loser on every front. So it costs a lot of money, so it's super expensive, and it doesn't do a good job. In that case, that treatment is just dominated clearly in every dimension by the other one, and so we call it, uncreatively, a dominated treatment. Dominated treatments aren't common, I'll put it that way, because if you think about just a market, if there's some medicine that's millions of dollars and it doesn't work, well, it gets kicked out of the market very quickly. Like, that company goes out of business. And so it's not common to have dominated treatments because they just don't survive in the marketplace. But sometimes in the short run, we do see treatments that are dominated. Okay, one thing to keep in mind is that it is never optimal to use a dominated treatment because there's an alternative that is both more effective and cheaper. So anytime you do a cost effectiveness analysis between two treatments and you find that one is dominated, then that means that the physician or the policymaker should never go for the dominated treatment because, like, it's bad for the patient, it's bad for the economy, like, it's just bad. Again, usually there's not a dominated treatment, so to determine which treatment is better, we use something called an incremental cost effectiveness ratio. Okay, an incremental cost effectiveness ratio is the ratio of the incremental cost of pursuing one treatment over another to the incremental benefits of that treatment. So let's just kind of think about this conceptually. The idea is, suppose you're comparing two treatments and you find that one is cheaper, so it kind of wins in terms of being less costly, but it also doesn't do as good of a job. So in this case, it's not dominated because, like, it is cheaper at least. It doesn't work as well, but it's cheaper. So at least in one dimension, it kind of wins. So what we want to think about is, like, well, what do we go for? Do we go for the cheap option that doesn't do as good of a job, or do we go for the option that does a better job, but it costs lots of money? And so, again, this is where we use an incremental cost effectiveness ratio. Basically, the easiest way to think about an incremental cost effectiveness ratio is it's a ratio that puts a price tag on a treatment to tell you kind of how much are you going to have to pay to get the additional effectiveness. So it doesn't necessarily say that one is better than the other, one treatment is better than the other. It just gives you a very kind of objective measure for, like, how much are you going to have to spend if you want the additional effectiveness. And then each person can have their own judgment in terms of whether that price tag is too high or too low. Okay, there's an equation that goes with this. So we call the incremental cost effectiveness ratio an ICER, I-C-E-R. And suppose we're thinking about two treatments, A and B. The ratio, or the ICER, is going to be equal to the difference between the two treatments' costs. So CA is the cost of treatment A, CB is the cost of treatment B. That goes in the numerator. And then the denominator is the difference in the two treatments' effectiveness levels. So EA is the effectiveness of treatment A, EB is the effectiveness of treatment B. Okay, let's just think about two allergy medicines. So we can have allergy medicine A and then Benadryl. Okay, so let's think about what would things look like if Benadryl was more costly, but it's less. Benadryl's more costly, but it's also more efficient. Okay, if Benadryl is more costly, then the numerator is going to be negative. But if Benadryl is more efficient, then the denominator is going to be negative, and the whole ratio is going to turn into a positive. Okay, now let's think about what would happen if the reverse was true. So let's say that Benadryl is less costly, but it's also less efficient. If Benadryl is less costly, then the whole numerator is going to be positive, but if Benadryl is less efficient, the whole ratio is going to be positive, and again, we have a positive ratio. Okay, that's one situation. What if it was true that Benadryl, relative to the other allergy medicine, was cheaper, so it's less costly, and in addition to being cheap, it's also like really good. It's like really efficient. Okay, if it's really efficient and it's cheaper, that means we're in this situation where Benadryl dominates, and so allergy medicine A, or allergy medicine type A, is dominated. Okay, if Benadryl is cheaper, that means the numerator will be positive. If Benadryl is more efficient, that means the numerator is going to be negative. Okay, this is unique because now we have a whole ratio that in total is negative. Okay, so here's the bullet points. So when the ICER is negative, like the entire ratio, there's a clear ranking. One treatment dominates the other. When the ICER is positive, as in the whole ratio is positive, there's a cost versus effectiveness trade-off. So in other words, one treatment is more costly, but also more effective, or alternatively, one treatment is less costly, but also less effective. Okay, note that in this situation, note that when the ICER is positive, we have to think more about which treatment is subjectively better, or to what extent we're willing to give up some effectiveness to save some money. So the idea here is, suppose you have two treatments that you're comparing to each other, and you put their cost levels into the ratio, you put their effectiveness levels into the ratio, and out spits a number of 100. So let's just say ICER equals 100. Okay, what would that mean? That would mean that to get one more unit of effectiveness, you would have to pay $100 more. Okay, let's suppose that you put all the numbers into the ICER equation and outspit a total ICER of $20,000. Okay, ICER equal to $20,000 would mean that if you're going to switch over to the treatment regime that's more effective, then the cost to get one more unit of effectiveness is going to be $20,000. So again, the ICER effectively provides you with a price tag. It just tells you how much are you going to have to pay to get one more unit of effectiveness. It doesn't tell you whether it's a good decision to go with the more expensive treatment, because each person or each policymaker is going to have to decide for themselves, is $20,000 more expensive or too expensive relative to what I'm comfortable with in terms of me purchasing one extra unit of effectiveness from a drug or a treatment. Okay, I'm just going to kind of throw this out here, and if you have an interest in it, you can Google it. So in the United States, our government implicitly has a threshold for what ICER they think is okay, that they feel comfortable with in terms of kind of providing insurance coverage for treatments that yield one extra level of effectiveness for this particular price tag. And kind of the rule of thumb ICER threshold that the United States uses is $50,000. So in other words, what policymakers kind of roughly use as a gauge to determine whether or not a particular drug or treatment is worth it in terms of having Medicare or Medicaid cover it is, does that drug give you one more unit of effectiveness at a price tag of $50,000 or less? If it does, then they consider that treatment or drug to be a good deal. If that treatment or drug generates one more unit of effectiveness, but it does so at a price tag of more than $50,000, then it's kind of deemed to be kind of too costly. This isn't a strict rule that policymakers always use, but this is kind of the rule of thumb in terms of the price tag that the U.S. government thinks is acceptable in terms of what they're going to spend their money on. Okay, the ratio is very kind of clean cut if you have very discrete numbers for cost levels and effectiveness levels. But some additional considerations are, okay, what do you consider to be the cost of a drug? The easy answer would be, well, it's the amount of money that is required to develop and purchase and whatever the treatment. But in the real world, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So one of the ER doctors that I used to work with, one of his big research agendas was to figure out if you put a patient in a CT scanner and you expose them to radiation, how much does that increase the likelihood of them developing cancer in the future? Because radiation increases likelihood of tumors. And so you can think about, well, what is the cost of a CT scan? There's a monetary value for how much that machine costs or how much it costs the patient to have a CT scan. Clearly that needs to go into the C for the cost. But another cost of a CT scan is the increased likelihood of developing cancer. And so that probably needs to go into the cost too, but trying to figure out how you would incorporate that into the cost is tricky. And then the more difficult thing is how do you measure effectiveness? So in order to calculate an ICER, we need to know, okay, allergy medicine type A, it has an effectiveness of a number. Benadryl has an effectiveness of a number, and then the question remains, how do you come up with a number for the effectiveness of a drug? So the way we've kind of decided as a profession to come up with effectiveness levels is we quantify effectiveness using something called a QALY. Okay, QALY stands for Quality Adjusted Life Year, so QALY. And I'm going to start with the definition of a QALY and then kind of explain it to you. So the definition of a QALY is a QALY is a unit of life expectancy that is adjusted for the quality of life during those years. Okay, so here's where I'm going back to this story that I told you of someone in a car wreck who's in a vegetative state and they're on life support. Okay, suppose you are thinking about this person and you want to kind of quantify whether or not putting them on life support would, how much effectiveness would that yield? What is the effectiveness number for life support? Well, life support, in theory, can keep you alive for a very, very long time. So one kind of answer to that question might be, well, the effectiveness of life support is enormous because it keeps you alive, and so it's super, super effective at that. But then realistically, you also have to think, well, okay, it's keeping somebody alive, but if there's no brain activity and the person doesn't have a high quality of life, then a life support machine wouldn't be as effective as another machine that both kept you alive and gave you back your brain activity and allowed you to walk and kind of have a normal life. So we can't just think of effectiveness as how good a medicine is at keeping you alive. There's also a dimension of how good do you feel? Like, not only are you breathing and is your heart beating, but like, do you feel healthy and do you have like the ability to enjoy life? Okay, so this is where we use a QALY to help us make comparisons between different treatment, or we use qualities to help us understand like the two dimensions of medicine, both keeping somebody alive and then also giving them a high quality of life. Okay, the idea of a QALY is we're going to think about 1 year, so it's a life year, singular, and we're going to adjust that year for the quality of life that's realized within the year. So, I'm going to start with the equation, then I'll give you some examples that will make this more clear. So, a QALY is equal to Q subscript T times P subscript T. Okay, first of all, the subscript T's denote a particular year of a person's life that you're looking at. So maybe it's the year 2020. Okay, within that year, a person is going to have a Q, and this is going to be true for every year. So each year, a person has a value for their Q. 2020 also has a value for its Q. And each year of life is going to receive a quality weight Q, where Q is between 0 and 1. So the idea is if Q is equal to 0, that means the quality of life is 0. That's kind of equivalent to death. Like, you have no capacity whatsoever to enjoy life. Whereas if a Q is equal to 1, that means the person has perfect quality of life. So it's kind of like they have perfect health. So in any given year of a person's life, they're going to have a particular value of their Q. So when a kid is young and healthy, their Q for their elementary school years is going to be pretty high. And then as you age, your Q in each individual year of your life kind of becomes smaller because you don't feel as good. And so the idea is you're going to have a particular Q for each year of your life. Okay, the P is going to stand for PT is the probability of surviving year T. It is also going to be bounded by 0 and 1 because it's a probability. So your probability of surviving is going to be between 0 and 100%. Okay, so the idea is this QALY is a product of both how much quality of life you have in a particular year and your probability of surviving in a particular year. So let's just think about kind of two situations. One, let's suppose there's a person who has a Q equal to 0.5. Okay, first of all, just think about what that descriptively is telling us. Q equals 0.5 means a person's quality of life is like right in the middle of feeling awful and feeling wonderful. So they have like a mediocre quality of life. But suppose this person has a P equal to 1. Okay, P equal to 1 would mean the person has a 100% probability of surviving the year they're looking at. So if we just descriptively describe this person's situation, they're going to be living the entire year for sure, but they're going to be feeling kind of the entire year. Okay, so their QALY would be equal to 0.5 times 1. That is equal to 0.5. Okay, so their quality adjusted life year of 0.5 would be would be thought of as 1/2 of a year. So it's kind of like their situation of feeling for an entire year is equivalent to 6 months spent in perfect health, or 1/2 of a year spent in perfect health. So again, it's the quality adjusted life year. Okay, let's think about another situation. So suppose we have an entirely different person. Suppose they have a Q equal to 1 in the index year that we're looking at. A Q equal to 1 would tell us that this person has a wonderful quality of life. Like, they feel as good as they could possibly feel. But if this person has a P equal to 0.25, that means although they feel really good, their probability of living or surviving the year is only 25%. Okay, if we calculate their QALY, it would be 1 times 0.25, so their QALY would be equal to 0.25. That would tell us that this person's life in this index year that we're looking at is the equivalent of a quarter of a year or 3 months in perfect health. So again, the idea for the QALY is it spits out a number. Overall, the number is going to have to be somewhere between 0 and 1. That number of the QALY tells us effectively what portion of a year a person is spending with like full quality of life, given the particular circumstances that they're in, where sometimes quality of life is kind of great or not great, and sometimes their chance of living is great or not great. It incorporates both of those things and gives you kind of like a normalized value for what the equivalency is in terms of, let's just think, if they had perfect health and then we kind of scaled down the duration of that perfect health, what would the number be? Okay, again, the QALY, Q-A-L-Y, is all pegged on a single year. So what we can do is we can kind of extrapolate to look at a person's life and calculate a quality adjusted life expectancy. So QALE, which I haven't figured out another way of pronouncing this other than QALY. So we have QALY, which will have the Y at the end, and then I'll just say QALE for quality adjusted life expectancy. Okay, the quality adjusted life expectancy for a person is the number of QALYs a person is expected to live. So basically, what you do to calculate a quality adjusted life expectancy is for each year of a person's life, for each T, from T naught to the last year of their life, which would be T up to some big number, Z, you would calculate the QALY for each year, and then you would add up the QALY for year T naught, and then the next year, and the next year, and the next year, and the next year. So basically, the quality adjusted life expectancy is just a whole bunch of QALYs added up together. Okay, in total, this tells you kind of the equivalent of how many years a person is living with perfect health. So again, the idea is a person has a life that varies in duration and quality. Quality adjusted life expectancy is, let's just say, okay, if we assume a person feels great, then let's normalize kind of the duration of them feeling great once we kind of condense all of their individual QALYs together. Same as before, each year of life receives a quality weight Q that's between 0 and 1, so that's same as before. And P, same as before, is the probability of surviving the particular year that you're looking at. So when we index everything by T, it means the probability of surviving that year T. And we're also going to assume a person's current age is T naught. So anytime you're calculating quality adjusted life expectancy, the idea is we're going to start out the calculation from today and then look at life expectancy from today. So the initial year or age is going to be T naught. And then the person has the potential to live some years in the future. So Z is going to be kind of the maximum years past today that person could live. So again, assume a person's current age is T naught with the potential to live to age Z. Okay, so if this kind of stuff is interesting to you, consider a career in public health because they deal with these things a lot. So that is it for chapter 14. If you have questions about any of the material in today's class or in previous chapters that are coming up on the exam, definitely reach out and I'll try to help. And then after 10 minutes, we'll meet and do an exercise. for today's exercise, I'm going to have you do quite a few. Well, I'm going to have you do more than one question, but the purpose of this is just to give you extra practice before the exam. So question number 1 is, suppose the cost of an MRI is $90 and the cost of an X-ray is $100. On a 10-point scale, the effectiveness of an MRI is 9 and the effectiveness of an X-ray is 7. Okay, the question is, will the incremental cost-effectiveness ratio be positive or negative, and why? So to answer this, you really have to calculate what the ICER is and then look at whether it's positive or negative, and then think about what a positive or negative ICER tells us. Okay, the next thing is, consider the following situation. FYI, the table will be bigger on Blackboard. But the situation is, Adam is 50 years old and has cancer. If he doesn't get any chemotherapy, he is expected to live until age 55. His quality of life for the next 4 years will remain high, but it will steeply fall the final year of his life. If Adam does get chemotherapy, he is expected to live until age 60. However, chemotherapy will take 5 years, and during that time, his life will be really rough. After that, his quality of life will improve. Suppose the numbers that represent these trade-offs are given in the table that you probably can't see. But the overall story here is, we got this guy, and he's diagnosed with cancer, and then he has this decision to make, which is a decision that a lot of people actually do have to make. Do you forego treatment and kind of feel pretty good for a short amount of time, or do you kind of go through all of kind of the difficulty of going through treatment and not feel great in the immediate future because treatment is so rough, but then after treatment you have a longer life expectancy? Okay, the first thing that you need to answer is, how many quality years is Adam expected to live if he forgoes treatment? In other words, what is his quality adjusted life expectancy? And the next thing you need to answer is, how many quality years is Adam expected to live if he gets chemotherapy? In other words, what is the quality adjusted life expectancy under the decision to get chemotherapy? So again, these last 2 questions will give you two numbers that a patient, or a physician could kind of use to compare. So the idea is kind of like, what would be your quality adjusted life expectancy if you go the route of not getting treatment and feeling good for a little bit of time, versus going the route of getting chemo and then not feeling good in the immediate future, and then kind of living longer after that. So once you have these questions answered, that will be it. Again, reach out if you have any questions, and enjoy the rest of your day.